Thank you, Melissa, and welcome everyone to our second day of the SARE Annual Virtual Conference. Today we have a special guest. Before I introduce, as was mentioned, our special guest, let me welcome everyone from around the country and our friends in Mexico, Puerto Rico, and the United Kingdom joining us today. As was mentioned, we have over 1,000 people today, and we're here to listen to a very inspirational individual, someone that I've gotten to know, who's done so much for so many, and the corporation that he represents has done the same. So, Bill, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. I know you run a very, very busy schedule, but we appreciate the fact that you're able to spend some time with us.
Well, hi, Ignacio, and thank you so much, and thank you for having me. This is a real honor, and you and your organization and your president-elect Jane Garcia do so much for so many people that I'm the one who should be thanking you.
As you probably know, I'm from the Michigan area, from southeastern Michigan. I had the opportunity to grow up in Michigan, and so I know what the Ford Motor Company does for families. My parents were migrant farm workers that came from Texas, and we settled in Michigan. While they personally did not work for Ford Motor Company, I had aunts and uncles that did. I've had cousins, I've had friends, and I have a son that's in your employ as well, at the Rossendale plant, Robert Salazar. So I know what the Ford Motor Company stands for. And let me tell you, growing up, there was always this idea that if you were fortunate enough to get into Ford Motor Company, you had a path to the middle class, in America. And you were going to be okay because you were making a little bit of a wage, you had health insurance, you had a pension plan down the road, and you were working with a good company. So I know what that means for so many people. And we're trying to achieve that in society today, what you've been able to do over the years and your predecessors, starting with your great-grandfather, Henry Ford, and inventing and reinventing the automobile industry and the assembly line and producing affordable cars for individuals. So that's meant a lot for so many. Now, you have indicated that the purpose of a company should be to better the lives of people. So, you said that that's what made us great in the past, and that's what's even going to make us greater in the future. How is Ford addressing that now, and how does that play into your future plans?
Well, thank you for that question, Ignacio, and thank you for those nice comments. At the heart of our company, we are a family company, but it's not just my family. As you pointed out, we have so many multi-generational employees, and one of my favorite things to do is to just go into one of our facilities and listen to people's stories, because they always come up and say to me, my aunt worked here, my uncle worked here, my mother, I'm fourth generation, I'm fifth generation.
Right.
Right. And I love that. But if you are a family company, you need to have those kind of values that hold the family together. One of those really strong values is that we take care of each other, but we also take care of the communities in which we live. And so, and that, of course, that expresses itself differently depending upon the era that you're in and the needs of the time. And so, for instance, obviously we're right in the middle of COVID, and we, back in March, April, quickly decided that we were going to start making personal protection equipment, and everything from masks and shields and gowns to more complicated things like ventilators and respirators. And what was really reassuring to me is our company just sprang into action. Nobody asked permission. Nobody asked, how are we going to get paid for this? They just said, we got to do this. And because this is what we've always done. I mean, if you look back to, World War I and World War II, we were the arsenal of democracy. And then in, more recent years, we switched to making, fire trucks and ambulances and everything we can to help, police vehicles, whatever the community needed. We were there. And so, this is a very strange time we're in. But one of the things that we felt we could do is to just gear up our company to make all these things that will benefit our world. And so I'm really proud of our company for doing that. And it is all about the values of our company, and that's why I think we were able to move so quickly. Other companies eventually kind of followed, but they didn't have the kind of guiding light that we have, which is this principle that you take care of each other and you take care of your communities.
One of the things that in the business that I'm in terms of helping people get back into the workforce, that I recognize is that when we attempt to deal with the issues of poverty, one of the biggest barriers that people have had in the past is the lack of mobility, getting to where the jobs are. And you as a corporation and address that. And that's very important if we're going to move society forward.
Well, that's right. That's right, Ignacio. It's interesting. There was a study, and you probably saw it. I think it was done a couple of years ago out of Harvard that said that the number one barrier to people getting out of poverty is being able to get to where the work is.
Correct.
And so, we've kind of dedicated ourselves to helping with that. And I think, one of the things we're working on little bit longer term are self-driving vehicles, because if those vehicles can pick somebody up and take them right to where the work is, and get them home safely, then that will be a great thing. So it's something we're really committed to, because it's interesting. Over the years, you think about our major cities like New York. When New York's was in its kind of, well, I wouldn't say infancy, but particularly through most of the 20th century, there were neighborhoods, and in those neighborhoods were the jobs, and so people walked to their jobs. But then what started to happen is those jobs were moving further and further out, often way into the suburbs, and the people that were in the neighborhoods just couldn't get to them. And that's been sort of a legacy, unfortunately, that's existed for quite some time. So we're actually working very hard to try and change that.
Right, right. You touched on a point earlier. You related to the pandemic, and obviously today, again, we're looking at a situation that could be a little scary for us going forward. But obviously, you've learned some lessons in working through that. And you shared a little bit of that. Are there any other things that you could share with us? And obviously today too, we're dealing with so much social unrest in the country. What lessons have you learned in these areas, and how as a corporation are you related to this?
Well, so you mentioned a couple things, the pandemic, and then also some of the social issues that have really been coming to the fore in the last 4 or 5 months. And I think on the latter, we've done a lot of listening, both to our employees and also to experts, to say, what does an inclusive company look like? We have a number of pilot programs. We're just getting going on that, and we're working very closely with our partners internally that are from underrepresented communities to, and one of the things we do is we actually have a reverse mentorship where, so I have somebody who's a mentor to me. She happens to be from the African American community, where she teaches me and I listen, and I get to ask her all kinds of questions in a very safe environment about, kind of the things we're doing right, the things we should be doing better, what her own experiences were. And all of us at the leadership level have that. And that to me has been great. I mean, and so then the question is, okay, now what are you going to do about it? And so we're in or as I say, early days of putting some pilot programs in that we'd like to try and see how they go. So that, we've been responding to that. And because it's easy to put out a statement and say, this is what we stand for. But frankly, if you don't do anything different, they're hollow words. So we wanted to make sure that we listened. We of course we put out statements, but we had to do more than that. We had to really listen and be responsive, and then set a path to really become a truly inclusive and diverse company. And that starts obviously at day one with recruiting, and then all the way through. How do we progress people through the executive ranks and all that? And then to the first part of your question, the pandemic, we have learned a lot. And and as I said a minute ago, a lot of it is about taking care of each other. But we also, if you want to take care of each other, you better make it a safe workplace. So we worked very hard with the UAW, our partners, to come up with protocols that everybody would feel safe coming to work. And knock on wood, they've really worked. Even in this raging pandemic that we are in now, our plants and facilities have been quite safe. Now, there's no guarantee about the future, but that's, thankfully, I think the protocols we put into place work. In fact, they've been copied by
Right.
by
Right.
many others, which
Right.
we're happy about. We love,
Sure.
sometimes you don't like to be copied. In this case, we're thrilled to be copied.
Right. Right. Yes. I indicated earlier that I have a son that works at the Rossonville plant, and
Yep.
he was, there where you were making the ventilators. He actually has a degree in information security, but he works there as an electrician,
Interesting.
he's so, I guess, thrilled to be able to do that. And as I mentioned, you have great packages, so he's there for the amount of time that it takes him to make sure that he's going to be okay,
Well,
and
that's
you provide that.
fantastic.
And,
Well, you mentioned Rossonville plant. I mean, obviously that was sort of ground zero for us in terms
Right.
of PPE. And, we had the president come to thank the employees at Rossonville, and, that was great. And regardless of what anybody thinks of the president, to have a sitting president come and say thank you was really a great thing. So, we were very pleased to have that happen.
Right. Now, you've been described as a dedicated and environmentalist. You're very concerned, obviously, with your company and what you do there, and then the nation, because of the corporation. What are some of the examples in this space that Ford Motor Company has been doing in recent years?
Well, Ignacio, it was interesting. People sometimes ask me, well, why are you such an environmentalist? Well, a couple things. First of all, as I was going through college, I was exposed to a lot of thinking that was counter to what I grew up with. So I grew up thinking the auto industry was 100% good, and everything we did was great. But then I got to college and realized that no, we're polluting. We use some nasty chemicals. We send stuff up into the air, and it really occurred to me that unless we kind of tried to fix that, that we wouldn't be able to attract the best and the brightest of the next generation, because they wouldn't want to work there because of what we did wouldn't align with their values. And I never wanted that to happen, because I think that any company is only as good as its people. So I really came back to after college to Michigan, and tried to introduce environmental thinking. Well, the early days, it was like talking to a brick wall, and there were a lot of people who thought I was this kind of crazy radical, and that I should just keep my mouth shut. But I didn't, and I kept pushing and kept pushing. And as the years went by, a couple things happened. One is people started to realize maybe I wasn't completely crazy, and then secondly, that we really did start to kind of get a few wins under our belt. So, for instance, 20 years ago, we published our first sustainability report, and at the time, it was seen as a radical thing, because I remember there were a number of news articles written saying, has Bill Ford lost his mind because he's published a report criticizing his own company?
Right.
Well, we did that every year. We said, this is what we're doing well, and this is what we need to work on. Because unless you actually benchmark and put real specific goals out, it's just words. So we did that. And then the Rouge Center was something that I did early in my chairmanship, where I wanted to take the world's biggest brownfield site and make it the greenest assembly plant.
Right.
And then we, fast forward to today, we're electrifying our fleet with, the F-150, the new Mustang Mach-E, and the Ford Transit. And then most recently, we have the new Ford Rouge Electric Vehicle Center, which is going to run 100% on renewable electricity while making an electric vehicle. So I think it's really important that we show leadership as a company, and one of the things that we know, at least I know, is it really energizes our employees. They feel very proud of working at a company that cares. Because if you
Right.
get back to our earlier conversation about caring for our communities and caring for the world in which we live, then this is just an extension of that. How can we take something that was perhaps not great that we were doing and change that. And thankfully with technology today, we can really clean up pretty much everything that we've been doing, the vehicles themselves and how we make the vehicles.
There's been a lot of work within your company as well in terms of smart mobility.
Yeah.
And it goes kind of, I guess, hand in hand with that. You are the Nostradamus of the automobile industry. 20 years ago, you started talking about one day in the future we're going to have cars that we build that will show up and take you where you need to go, and you're not necessarily buying them, but we're making them.
Right.
What kinds of things do you see in that world, for Ford Motor Company?
Well, it's interesting. I guess I'll take Nostradamus. I've been called a whole lot worse. So, but now, I think when we look to the future of transportation, there are going to be lots of different elements to it. You'll have things that we're calling micromobility, which will be the last mile of delivery, either delivery of a package or delivery of a human. And you say, well, why does that matter? Well, many cities are starting to restrict traffic into the cities, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult to park in city centers. So what their cities are trying to do is push the vehicles, the privately owned vehicles, out further. Well, okay, but then how are you going to get into the city centers? And that's why you'll see things, and you're already seeing things like scooters and electric bikes and those kinds of things. There will be robots that will deliver packages to, particularly in cities, to various buildings. That will happen, and that's you mentioned self-driving vehicles; those are coming, and they'll be riding. The nice thing is there should be fewer vehicles on the street because these vehicles should have uptime of like 16 hours, and they can, so you don't need as many of them.
Right.
That's coming for sure. What will also come are vehicles connected to each other on a network, so they're all talking to each other. So, for instance, if you're coming in on a commuter train to a city, the self-driving vehicle should know that the train's running 20 minutes late, and they won't all show up at the wrong time. So everything will be talking to each other. It sounds a little bit, scary, like a future that's crazily high tech. But in fact, the benefits will be real. The cities will be more livable. They'll have fewer
Right.
vehicles. People will be able to get to where they're going easier. We already talked about people being able to get to where the work is. That will become easier. So, I don't want to paint a picture that looks like a sort of a dystopian future, because I don't believe it'll be that. I think on balance, yeah, there may be some things, and we're working hard on privacy and those kinds of things so that it doesn't look like Big Brother is running your life. But I think on balance, it's going to be a really good thing, and so that will all come. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is in Detroit. We purchased the train station,
Right.
and actually we have a number of buildings around there, and we want to turn that into a test bed for all the things that I'm talking about. Because if you think about, there's a corridor that goes all the way from Ann Arbor, Michigan to downtown Detroit, and on Michigan Avenue, runs all the way. And what's really cool is from Ann Arbor to Corktown, in downtown Detroit, where the train station is, on Michigan Avenue, you run into everything. You run into crowded city streets, but then you get a little further out and it's more rural. So you're dealing with rural traffic, bicycles, pedestrians. So kind of anything you would ever potentially run into will be encountered on that kind of corridor. And so we're going to use that as a test bed, and then to envision the future that we've been talking about. I'm very excited by it.
That sounds exciting. A great future ahead. You know, you just touched on the Michigan, Central train
Hmm.
station. I worked in Southwest Detroit for many years before I became the president of SARE National. I was the president of SARE Metro Detroit, so I worked in that area for many years, and was there for a big portion of what was the downturn.
Right.
And that kind of represented the city in a particular way, that train station.
It did.
And you're bringing life back into the city as the city has turned so dramatically. You're bringing life back into that area, which is I think a testament to the kind of corporation really you are, because you didn't have to go there, and you're putting your autonomous and electrical business there.
Well, Ignacio, I just got so sick and tired of seeing that train station as a national poster for everything that was wrong with Detroit.
Right.
And and I would drive by it all the time, and it just made me sad.
Yeah.
And so, one day, I was talking to Mary Culler, who works for me, who's now in charge of that whole development. And we started talking about what if we bought it? What could we do with it? And pretty soon we did it. and um, and so and I think that whole area is going to be so vibrant and so interesting. One of the things that you mentioned, though, was Southwest Detroit. Well, we learned a really interesting lesson from the leadership of Southwest. So as we announced the train station, and we were very excited, we kept saying, this is the gateway to Corktown and Detroit. And then the leaders of Southwest said, well, wait a minute. It's also the gateway to Southwest, and it's turned its back to it, because you're thinking of only the front facing. So we completely refigured our the way
Right.
we were thinking about the project, and realized we have to have two entrances, one facing Southwest and one facing Corktown. And so, it was something that we would never have thought of, but it's so obvious once it's pointed out to you that this is something that we should do. So, and then of course, just a few blocks from there, we have what we call our resource and engagement center, which is there to serve the community, and obviously you know that well.
Right. Right.
Um, and so, we have a long history in Southwest Detroit, and in the area that people still call Mexican Town,
Right.
and so that relationship is very important to us. And as I say, people like like Jane Garcia, who you know exceptionally well, who is a huge friend of our Ford Motor Company and a great friend of mine personally. And I'm very excited that she's going to be, the next head of your organization, because
Yes.
she is such a special person, and like you, has been in Detroit through the best of times and the worst of times, and has been, and in the worst of times was such a beacon of hope and positive energy when there was so much negativity around the city. Race relations were terrible. The city was decaying. Corporations were leaving, had left, and and through it all, Jane was so positive and so energetic. And now, as you pointed out just a second ago, the city is really coming back in a way that I'm so happy with. You have to be so happy with.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yes, there's so much more to do, and there'll
Yeah.
always be more to do.
Yeah.
But boy, yeah,
Recently, I was the chair of the Hispanic Association of Corporate Responsibility, and we took our national conference to Detroit,
yep,
and I got a lot of opposition. And I said, well, you don't know what's been going on in Detroit. You only listen to what's in the media. And to a person, they were just amazed with the transformation. And it seems like every week up to to the pandemic, it seemed like every week there were new businesses that were opening downtown. Something new was coming in, and there was just this buzz and the feel that the city was really, really on the rebound. And it felt good.
well, it felt great, and particularly after so many years of becoming sort of a national punchline. we all of a sudden became the hot new city. It was really interesting. I knew we had achieved that status when I started getting calls from friends of mine who are in New York saying, "Hey, I'm thinking of buying a building in Detroit." And a couple of these people had never even been to Detroit,
Right.
so yeah, I'm really happy with where it's going. Obviously, the pandemic has taken its toll on a lot of the new restaurants that were opening up and a lot of the new retail shops. And my sense, boy, do I hope that we get this vaccine up and running pretty quickly and that we can get back to life as we knew it.
Sure, sure. Yep, yep. You know, along the line of being concerned with communities. You know, you've been alive, Sarah. I mean, Sarah has received support from Ford Motor Company. The Hispanic community has received support from the Ford Motor Company for the relationship goes on for more than 40 years, and
Yep.
including when I was in Detroit. Ford was always in the community. Do you have any examples or thoughts of why you've been doing this for so long, and why is Ford really in the community with us?
Well, as you point out, it's been a long relationship, and we've done a lot together. I think one of the things that there's a program called Driving Dreams that I'm really excited about. And it's a partnership with our dealers, and it empowers youth and Hispanic communities to pursue higher education. And I think to date we've granted over 200,000 scholarships to Hispanic students to continue their education. And to me, those kinds of programs are really awesome. And then, if I think about globally, I mean, we have a program in Mexico which is well known in Mexico. It's not so well known elsewhere, but it's one that I think is really interesting because it stood the test of time. So over 50 years ago, we started building schools, elementary schools in Mexico in rural areas where the government hadn't either didn't have the funds or just weren't organized enough to do. And to date, we've built over, I think, almost 200 elementary schools, and we serve about 80,000 students annually. And what we do is Ford, will build the school, pay for all that, and then we ask the closest dealer to adopt the school. And the dealer then helps provide the annual expense of, things like, all the supplies that are needed for the school. And as I say, that's been a multi-year kind of thing that has stood the test of time. And so I think of those two programs very different, but we have so many others that we've done together. In Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, Panama, Puerto Rico. I mean, you kind of go down the list. We've done a lot of disaster relief, unfortunately, recently, particularly with hurricanes. And I think about Puerto Rico, and we've done a lot of work there in the last few years. I wish we hadn't had to, but we were there. So it's just part of kind of who we are. In terms of taking care of our greater community. One of the things that I'm personally very proud of is I started something several years ago called the Volunteer Corps, which enables our employees to go anywhere in the world to work on causes. And it was a little hard to get that up and running because our human resource group found every reason why not to do it.
Right.
And I kept saying, okay, fine, okay, well, let's go do it. And so, but it's great. It's really great because we've done a lot in the Latin community, but we've also done a lot, just throughout the world on causes. And so, the way to keep, I think, the culture alive in terms of giving back and really being a family company is provide opportunities like the Volunteer Corps to our employees where they can actually go live it.
Right.
And so I love that program.
Yeah. My relationship with Ford goes back, a long time. And, I can remember when I first got to Detroit from the University of Michigan that, I met an individual, his name was Bob Reed, and then Frank Judge and Helen Love and, Carlos Horta and Rocky Pesquisa eventually and Monica
Yeah.
Martinez on down the line. People that were just in the community, and representing Ford so well. And you've always been there, and we appreciate that.
Well, I think we encourage it, and we try and get all of our employees involved in the community, because what we find is whatever you give, you get back many more, in terms of, if you can actually see the impact you can have on people. And I think a lot of times people in big companies think, oh, well, we'll just write a check.
Right.
Well, checks never hurt, but that's not the goal. The goal is to have every single employee personally involved and understanding, how rewarding it is to do that. And
Right.
we actually find that our employees, and this won't be any probably great secret, but they feel better about us as a company and about us as an employer because we encourage them to go work in the community. So, yeah, checks will always be part of it, and people will always ask for checks, and we'll write checks. But I think much more importantly, is the personal commitment.
Sure. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that you do have a representative of Ford Motor Company on our national board, Joey de Avila
Yep.
from the Ford Fund.
Yep.
And you've been there with us, and through the good times and the bad times.
Exactly.
Because there were some lean years there for Ford, and
Oh, you bet.
you personally had to put everything, including the family name, on the line and secure $23 billion in loans. And those were some hard days for the Ford Motor Company, but you survived, and you're a better corporation today for it.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to relive that again, but that was
I know.
it was kind of a high wire act without a net. But yeah, it was. But it was interesting though. So we've been talking a lot about culture and all that, but what was so important was the way our employees reacted to that time. So, as you know, our two major competitors went bankrupt during that period.
Right. Right.
And we didn't. And yeah, borrowing money helped, but what really was the difference, I think, was, I was flooded with notes from our employees at all levels saying, "Hey, Bill, don't give up. We can do this." Well, those kind of notes are usually top down, but they were coming to me from, the plant floor, from new hires to, and people weren't even sure they were going to have a job on Monday morning. And yet they were still flooding me with this. And I'll never forget, Saturday night, Sunday, people were there. They were working till midnight, 1 a.m. They were getting no overtime, but they were doing everything they could to pull our company through. And if I ever doubted the importance of having a culture, which I never did, but boy, did that bring home why it's important. Because if you take care of your employees and you make them feel like they work for a special place,
Sure.
when the chips are down, boy, do
Yep.
they really repay it.
That's correct. Yes. Just as an aside, a couple of weeks ago, I needed to get a haircut, and the person that I was supposed to see was not there. I showed up, and she had an extended vacation, and so I said, "Well, I'm going to have to, take whoever's available." And so I was talking with the person who was, because they're talking to people to begin with.
Sure.
And she said, "Well, I don't work here full time." I said, "Well, where do you work?" She says, "Well, I run the Ford Motor Company barbershop, the hair salon, or whatever,
Yep.
I said, "Is it in the world headquarters?" She says, "No, it's not in the world headquarters. I forget what other near there, but she mentioned that, and I didn't say anything about today's conversation to her. I just was listening. And I said, "So what's it like?" And she goes, "They are some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. And, some of the things that obviously take place there are very good because everybody is happy to work there." I said, "I never meet anybody who has something negative to say." I said, "That's rare."
That's really rare. Well, first of all, your haircut looks good.
It's a couple of weeks old.
Well, better than mine. So I went into COVID with longer hair, and then it got really long. And so my wife gave me a buzz cut, and she's been buzzing me every 2 weeks since. And but I look forward to the day where I can actually go back to my normal haircutting routine.
Right, but I guess that's just a testament, to the kind of corporation that Ford is, and people are happy to be there. It's a family environment. She said people really enjoy being there.
Well, I hope so, and we don't do everything perfectly by any means, and there are days when we make our employees unhappy. And one of the things about being a family company is when you do make your employees unhappy, boy, do you hear about it. And so I get, I hear from a lot of employees when things are not to their satisfaction, and I love that, actually, because A, they feel free to tell me,
Right.
and B, it shows that they really care. I mean, they know what a good Ford looks like, and they're not going to stand for a bad Ford. And so I think it's great.
Right. We live in a different world than 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and demographics are changing dramatically in the country. I read recently where the economy of California is larger than the economy of India in
Mhm.
terms of gross domestic product, where the economy of Texas is larger than the economy of Russia in terms of gross domestic product. And one of the things that sticks out to me, is just those two examples of the two largest states we have, is that 50% of the students in the K-12 system, more than 50% of the students in the K-12 system in both states are Hispanic Latino,
Mhm.
just that population base alone. And so you're seeing a dramatic shift. And we see it throughout the country as well, where today 25% of all the kids, that are in the public school, well, in the school system nationally, are Hispanic Latino, and that within the next 15 years, that number is going to shoot up to 33%, and that as a population, it's going to be at 33% in the near future. So obviously, as a corporation, you have to be concerned with changing demographics. How you meet those customer needs, and
Of
do you
course.
have the cultural competency to address that going forward, because it's changing dramatically. um,
Well,
you
well,
know 50% of first time home buyers in this country are Hispanic, just Hispanic nationally. So you've got a big shift there. What is it, Ford doing as it relates to Hispanic employment and looking for talent?
Well, so it's interesting you mentioned that. I'll never forget when I was a very young, my best friend in college was Puerto Rican, and so when I joined Ford as a very young person, one of my first jobs was in advertising. So I called him up one day and I said, "Hey, thinking I was very enlightened, I said, I just interviewed a Hispanic advertising agency, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about it." And he said, "Well, don't make a big mistake." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Yes, the Hispanic community in some ways is a broad community, but in other ways, the Miami community really is
Right.
different than the Texas community. That's
Right.
different." And he said, "And if you step on the wrong landmine, you can really get it wrong." So, um, and he said, "So don't think that one message is going to fit all, and you really need to think about tailoring your messages to various communities and all that." And that was, so we had a long to talk about that, and that was, geez, 1982, I think. So, all those years ago, and um, and so that to me was kind of an eye opener. And so, if you ask what are we doing today, so obviously we've got a big recruiting push. One of the things that we're working very closely on, because we're basically a technical company, is a lot of STEAM education in the Hispanic community, because those students will become our employees in the future.
Right.
And I think that that the whole STEAM effort is something that nationally that we're really behind, because we're going to need kids that are engineers and mathematicians and scientists to help us. All the things we've been talking about in terms of mobility of the future, really will be based on that kind of education. So the Hispanic STEAM outreach is something that we're spending a lot of time on. And then, and you point out, it's not just our customer base that will be changing dramatically over the next, 10, 20 years, but also our employee base as well.
Right. Very important to keep up, and it just changed. You're seeing a much bigger Hispanic community, African American community,
You bet.
women, and so you have to reflect that and make sure that your corporation is relevant in those areas.
We do, and in some ways, it's almost harder for a company like us because, number one, we're 117 years old. And so when you're that old, you end up with a lot of legacy, recruiting programs, HR programs, that just absolutely need to change. Second is that when I joined Ford, it was sort of an old white boys club in some
Right,
ways.
right,
And if you start with that, sometimes it's harder to change than if you start with a clean sheet of paper. So we've had to really, kind of muscle our way through it over the last, probably 20 years. The good news is today, Jim Farley, who's our new CEO, we talk about, what the management team needs to look like in the next 5 years, how we're going to pull people through the system. Um, and, because unfortunately, left to your own devices, it probably won't happen naturally just because
right,
of,
right,
and so,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
so we're really, really pushing hard to, to make sure that our company looks like society, and that we also then understand the customers, because as you point out, that's changing dramatically as well.
Right. And I do know that you have, on your board, Kimberly
Yeah,
Cassiano,
yeah, she's
and
an old friend of mine.
right, right,
Yes, and she's fantastic. She's very outspoken, in terms of Hispanic, and Latina in particularly causes. And and she and I talk all the time about, where we need to concentrate our efforts and, where we're falling short.
right, right. And is we take credit for those that are, you had Jim Padilla, some years back, who was the president, COO
Yeah.
of the corporation.
But it's interesting, Ignacio. It shows you kind of what the world was like back then. He felt he had to call himself Jim Padilla,
Correct,
uh,
correct.
because of the Hispanic. He didn't. He was worried that I think that's why. Because I asked
Right.
him one day. I said, "Why aren't you Padilla?" And he said, "Well, I really am, but I grew up at Ford as Padilla."
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. And and a product of the Corktown area, is
Exactly,
theirs, yeah,
exactly.
there in
Well, then
Southwest Detroit.
Leo Padilla was very
Right,
active,
right.
and yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
exactly,
didn't mention Leo, but Leo was a dear friend who was, with us throughout as well.
exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you've been recognized, you've been honored, as, someone that gives back. You've done some amazing things and, in the Detroit area. When you brought the Detroit Lions back to the city, you probably received some flack because you did it at a time when it wasn't that popular to do, probably, and
That's
probably
right.
people were saying, "What are you really doing here?" But it became an anchor for Detroit, where people could say, "This has come back. This is a big thing." Why did you do that, and why is it important for corporations to give back to their cities?
Well, it's interesting. Back then, which was, gosh, I think we opened around 2002, so it was really in the '90s when we were planning Ford Field, and I went to Dennis Archer, who was the mayor at the time, who was enormously helpful, and actually Mike Duggan, who's now the mayor, was the number two guy at the county at the time, and so really it was Archer and myself and Duggan that did it, and I felt it was very important to have an anchor in downtown Detroit. But I'll never forget a very prominent businessman called me up one day and said, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I went to go see him. And he said, you're making the mistake of a lifetime by building the stadium, planning to build the stadium in Detroit. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, your fans won't feel safe. You won't get the police support. Nobody will want to come down and leave their car unattended. And all the money is in the northern suburbs, and
Right, right,
and blah blah blah. So and actually, that worried me because this is a person who didn't make many mistakes in his life, that was telling me this. So, but I still felt it was absolutely the right thing to do, and of course, over the years it's been great, but the early years it was a little dicey because the fans were a little afraid. There wasn't much to do before and after the games, so the suburbanites would get in their cars, they drive down, and the minute the game was over, they leave. But then gradually, restaurants and bars and all the places started to not only come up, but actually advertise and cater to the people. Hey, stay downtown, come down before the game, stay downtown after. And then, now, of course, we take it for granted that, that it's a fun place to be. And I just felt that was important. And for the same reason that I feel that doing the Michigan train station in Corktown is important, because, it is our city. And if you don't take care of your hometown, what are you going to take care of?
Sure.
And
Sure.
so many companies did leave. I remember, Ignacio, when I was a young man in the business community, there were so many big companies, banks and airlines, and department stores that called Detroit
Right.
home.
Right.
And then I joined a group. What at the time was called Detroit Renaissance, which were the head of companies in Detroit. And it was a big group. There were probably 30, maybe 40 of us on this. And then I looked around after about 15 years, and there were about 8 people sitting around the table. And it was really, really scary when I started to think about, and that's why I felt like those of us who were left really better step up. Otherwise, this was going to go south fast. And it's, as you pointed out earlier in this conversation, it's so nice now to see Detroit, on the other side of that, and really coming back and just being so vibrant. And it's the kind of city that you and I both envisioned it could be, and it's wonderful to see it start to be there.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that, for your investment in Detroit, for everything you do as a corporation. This has been just a thrill to have you with us today. Your journey has been a great one. I think people might assume that because your last name is Ford that you had it easy. You had to go into different areas of the corporation to understand it. You were in marketing, you were in the sales and product development and finance and everything. You had to spend time in Switzerland. You had to do the work. And I think that's the kind of the message that we want to send to all of the students all over the country and in different parts of the world listening today, is that, there is opportunity. Ford Motor Company is an exemplary kind of corporation that you should really consider. And we thank you for being with us today. It's been an honor to have you with us, and thank you again.
Well, thank you, Ignacio, and thank you for all you do. You're a great leader, and we all benefit from it, so thank you.
Okay. Melissa, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.